Imagine this. Midnight settles over a medieval village. The fire has gone cold. 10 souls are packed into a single room, the air heavy with breath, and the soft snore of a goat curled by the hearth. Straw pokes through tattered blankets. In the shadows, a husband reaches quietly for his wife. There are no walls, no sheets, no privacy, just ears in the dark and bodies too close to forget. In a world where everyone watched, how did love survive? Forget bedrooms. For most people in the Middle Ages, even the word room was a luxury. What we'd call a one-room home today was the whole house back then. Picture a dim, crowded rectangle made of wood or in colder regions, a long, low structure of turf, stone, or woven daub. A smoky central hearth offered weak heat, its fumes drifting through a hole in the roof. Everyone shared the space, parents, children, grandparents, maybe a servant, even livestock. The bed, a single straw-filled mattress, or blankets tossed over bare dirt. No pillows, no walls, no doors. 13th century English land records show most peasants lived in homes with just one heated space, the open hall. Probate inventories regularly listed one communal bed for the entire family. The dining table became a sleeping space at night. Parents and children wrapped in the same covers, huddled not for comfort, but for warmth. There was no privacy. Often, there wasn't even room to turn over. And yet, this cramped, public room was where love tried to live, where couples reached for each other through fatigue, through noise, through darkness. Marriage didn't offer seclusion, it guaranteed a lifelong audience. Even the wedding night lacked solitude. In some places, local custom demanded witnesses, escort the couple to bed, and ensure the union was consummated. Privacy wasn't a right. It was a rare miracle. For most, intimacy had no ceremony. It was stolen, improvised. A court record from 14th century tells of a woman accused of sleeping with her husband behind the bread oven, the only sliver of cover in a one-room house. In Essex, a servant girl testified she heard her masters every night, divided only by a thin curtain. Sex was expected in marriage. The church insisted on the marital debt being paid regularly, so couples learned to improvise. They whispered, waited, hoped the children were asleep, took chances on market days when the house might empty. Blankets were pulled over heads, breath slowed, and every creak in the floor was a risk. Everyone heard everything, but no one said a word. When you couldn't build a wall, you hung a curtain. In homes where timber was scarce and stone too frigid, fabric became the only barrier, thick, patched, wool, sometimes lined with fur. It muffled no sound, but offered the illusion of privacy. And illusion was sometimes enough. Wealthier peasants began listing bed curtains in inventories, a sign that even the poorest longed for a sliver of separation. The four-poster bed emerged not as a luxury, but as a sanctuary. Draped on all sides, it became a room within a room, a quiet space for whispers, for touch, for secrets. Most people, however, had far less: a pinned-up blanket, a reed screen, a ragged partition barely shielding one corner. It wasn't about shutting the world out entirely. It was about carving out something sacred in a space when nothing was ever truly yours. In these households, privacy wasn't spontaneous. It was strategy. Couples learned the rhythm of the room, when the baby slept deepest, when the fire flickered low, when chores scattered the others outside. Silence became a tool, a promise. Signals were invented, a lantern placed just so, shoe turned sideways, a glance at dusk that said everything without saying a word. Sometimes the home failed entirely. So lovers fled to the granary, behind the bakehouse, into the woods. Church records are filled with confessions made in stables, acts committed behind mill walls, under hedgerows, not stories of passion, but of necessity. Night patrols caught lovers in fields. Fines followed, shame followed, still they risked it. For married couples, it wasn't sin. It was survival. In one harsh winter of the 15th century, a couple was caught lying together on a sack of wheat behind a granary door while their home was packed with guests. The setting was rough, the conditions cold, but the act simple and brave was a form of defiance. In a world so hostile to privacy, every intimate gesture was revolutionary. The church never stopped talking about sex, but it rarely spoke of love. Sex within marriage was sanctioned, but only for making babies. Desire without reproduction, dangerous, suspicious, even sinful. Confession manuals from the 1200s instructed priests to interrogate not just the act, but the circumstances. Was it done quietly, in a proper place? Guilt clung not just to behavior, but to setting. Gossip fueled the church courts. In Norwich, 1442, a neighbor testified that a couple embraced behind a cloth, while the mother-in-law snored beside them. A maid once described in vivid detail the sound of creaking bedboards and muffled laughter. The walls were thin, floors moaned, and someone always listened. Not always out of cruelty, sometimes boredom. Sometimes simply because they couldn't help it. So intimacy became a rebellion, not against God, but against shame, against scrutiny, against the ever-listening world. Only the deep night offered mercy, not true privacy, but a temporary amnesty. When candles died out, when the village slept, when cold and silence wrapped the world, lovers had a chance. A hand found another, a breath warmed a neck. Words, too soft for even mice to hear, floated through the dark. These weren't passionate declarations or grand poetic vows. They were small acts of survival. A husband kissing the work-roughened fingers of his wife, a mother reaching across straw to feel the chest rise and fall beside her. In those hushed moments, love endured not loudly, but faithfully, not with flourish, but with patience. By the late 1500s, change arrived. Wealth shaped new kinds of homes, multiple rooms, separate kitchens, withdrawn chambers for sleep and solitude. Locks appeared, shutters thickened. Privacy, once a dream, became built into architecture. Walls weren't just for shelter anymore, they were for silence. Intimacy, finally, had space, but for the poor, the change came slow. Cottages remained crowded, yet even there, progress whispered in. Chimneys replaced smoke holes, beds tucked into corners, fabric dividers, wooden screens. Glass began to fill window frames, brick replaced crumbling earth. Homes slowly learned to hold secrets, and so did love. So the next time you close your bedroom door, dim the lights, or reach for someone's hand in the quiet pause, remember them, the ones who never had the chance. The ones who found ways to love in silence, in darkness, in crowded rooms. They loved without space, without privacy, without ease, and still they loved. So the next time close your bedroom door, dim the lights, or reach for someone's hand in the quiet pause, remember them, the ones who never had the chance. The ones who found ways to love in silence, in darkness, in crowded rooms. They loved without space, without privacy, without ease, and still they loved. They loved through the creak of floorboards and the breath of livestock, through judgmental neighbors and paper-thin walls, through cold nights and cramped days. They loved not in the comfort of luxury, but in the hard-earned tenderness of survival. In every whispered word and hidden glance, they carved out something, sacred from the noise. They didn't need roses or poetry or candlelight. They needed only the courage to reach out anyway, to touch, to trust, to try. Because in a world where everything was shared, love became the one thing they could make their own, quiet, hidden, fierce, a promise held in the hush of night. And for a few fleeting hours, the darkness did not judge it, protected. It didn't take love away. It gave it a place to breathe. And that, in the end, was enough, because love, even stripped of comfort and ceremony, still finds a way, not in grand gestures, but in shared warmth on a winter night. In the soft shuffle of limbs beneath a blanket, pulled high, in the weight of a hand resting gently on a familiar shoulder, in the soft murmur of a name, spoken not to be heard, but to be felt. These moments, small, secret, sacred, were the quiet triumphs of the heart. They remind us that intimacy was never about the setting. It was about the effort, the intent, the will to connect, despite it all. And as the centuries passed, walls rose, locks turned, and bedrooms became private sanctuaries. But the struggle that came before, the long history of loving in the open, under watchful eyes, should never be forgotten, because it's what made our solitude possible. So when we find loving comfort today, in silence, in space, let us remember those who loved without it. Let us honor their quiet defiance, their patience, their faith that love could bloom even in the dark. They did not wait for perfect conditions. They loved anyway. And that kind of love, that's the kind that lasts.